Right. So for this session, we are looking at MAC 2601, and this is our first lesson. We are basically just doing introduction for the module. Right. So it is important that you do very well and you understand the introduction, right? Because it covers, or it will be covered extensively in your multiple choice assignments. So you will see that in the module, you've got quite a number of multiple choice assignments, very long assignments, usually sometimes 50 marks, sorry, 50 questions, 50 marks, thereabout. So your assignments, especially the multiple choice ones, are very long. So what they ask there, some of it will be calculation, some of it will be theory, and the introduction will be asked extensively there. You need to make sure that you are very clear also on the theory as well. Right, so I want to start first by looking at taxation, maybe defining it. Right, so I want to look at taxation and provide a definition. Right, so when we look at taxation or when we define it, right, we want to provide a definition of taxation. Right, these are compulsory payments. These are compulsory, right, compulsory payments imposed on the citizens of a country, right, imposed on the citizens, right, or on citizens, right, of a country, right, by the government. Right, so these are compulsory payments required of citizens or imposed on citizens by a government of that particular country. Which taxes, good people, are you aware of? Which taxes can you give me? Right, so recently you know that, yes, sir. Right, recently you know that there was a big fight in connection with the budgeting process, with the national budget, where there was a fight over a certain tax called VAT. Right, so value-added tax is a tax that is levied in South Africa on consumption of goods. You have fuel levy whenever you buy fuel and pour fuel at the garage. There is a small percentage that is actually put there by SARS, which is going to be collected by the government for the maintenance of the country's infrastructure, the road infrastructure. So there are many different taxes that are charged by the government, and those are compulsory payments according to the rules that will be imposed by the government. Right. So one thing is that taxes are a response. Right. Taxes are a response. Right. In fulfillment of the social contract. Right. If you go to other literature, they call it a social compact. Right. So we have this thing that is called the social contract or the social compact. Now, this is an understanding. Right. This represents an understanding. Right. This is an understanding of the relationship between a government, right, of the relationship between a government and citizens. Right, between a government and citizens. Right, the government, right, provides certain goods and services. right? Certain goods and services, right, for the population, right, to thrive. So the government is responsible and expected to create a certain environment that will allow the citizens, right, of a particular country to survive and also to thrive, right? So examples, right? Security, the government should see to the security of a society, right? You will have the police, you will have the different arms of the law establishment, like the army, the police, and what have you, right? The government should see to the health of the citizens, education, right? Infrastructure, like your roads, right? Airports, etc., right? Social grants, right? etc. Right. So for the government to be able to provide all these things, right, it needs funding. Right. Then on the other hand, the citizens, right, the citizens, right, should provide funding, right, through taxes, right, to help fund government expenditure, right, to help fund government expenditures, right. So obviously the funds available to the government are not just limited to taxes. Right, the government can also complement the taxes provided by taxpayers through other means. Right, for example, the government can run some businesses. You have got some state-owned enterprises, which, if they are doing very well, they will generate income for the country. The government also does charge some monies for services provided, e.g., when people come here and want to do business in South Africa. Right, there are certain charges that they will pay, perhaps mining fees and similar items that can help the government raise funds. Right, so all of those things are going to pull into the funds available to fund, social services and other governmental needs. Right, however, still the tax is the major contributor to the funds that are then available to the government so that it can be able to provide all these things that are needed by the citizens. Right, so there are many different types of taxes that are levied in South Africa, and these taxes are levied on different things. Right, let's look at taxes levied in South Africa. Right, so taxes levied in South Africa. So there are a number of taxes that South Africa levies on citizens. Right, we have what is called the Income Tax Act, right, or the Income Tax. Right, this includes the following tax. Right, it includes also capital gains tax. Right, it includes turnover tax. Right, it includes dividend tax. Right, so these taxes are levied on income that is earned by the taxpayer. Right, it could be an individual, it could be a corporate taxpayer like a company. Right, when an entity earns income, right, SARS will want a small portion of that, or the government via SARS will want a small portion of that, which is called income tax. For example, when you work for a company, right? When you get your salary, there will be a small portion that is deducted to cover various taxes. So you pay tax as an individual, right? When the tax season comes, for individuals, you also submit tax returns. If you owe the government, you pay them. So individuals pay taxation on the income that they earn. A business that is doing business, that is an enterprise doing business, right, will generate profits, will generate income. From that income, a small portion or a significant portion, because it's 27% for a corporate, right, will be ring-fenced and paid over to the government. So we call that income tax. Right, we also have what we call value-added tax, VAT. Right, the recently famous value-added tax. Now, with value-added tax, you will notice every time that you buy goods or you access services, on your invoice, you normally get a portion that corresponds with VAT. It's called VAT tax. So it simply means when someone is selling to you, right, and that person is a VAT vendor, is someone who is registered to charge value-added tax. So if you have such a person, right, maybe they are actually selling you something, right, and the sale price that they want is 100,000. Now VAT is currently at 15%. So this is what your supplier is charging you. Right, SARS will then instruct that supplier to put an additional 15,000, which is 15% here, which is the VAT amount. So that at the end of the day, you now pay a total amount of 115,000, right, with 100,000 corresponding with what your supplier was charging you, right, the 15,000 corresponding with the charge that was included on the transaction price by SARS, so that eventually you will pay your supplier this much. Now your supplier, when he receives this amount, he will pay it over to SARS. Right, so this is called VAT. So VAT is basically tax that is charged when one buys goods and services, which means whenever there is a consumption of goods and services, value-added tax will be charged if the seller is registered to administer the VAT. Right, so that's another form of tax that you contend with in South Africa. Right, there are many taxes. We've got what is called estate duty tax. Right, when you inherit the estate of a deceased person, right, a part of the value of the deceased estate must be paid over to the government via SARS. Right, we have what we call customs duty. Right, when you import things from an outside country and you get into South Africa, right, you will be charged what is called customs duty by the customs official. They will bill you a certain amount so that you can bring the goods here into South Africa. That's customs duty. There is also transfer duty, right? When you transfer a capital asset from one individual to the other or from one company to the other, right, SARS will levy a VAT on that. Right. For example, if you are buying a building, you are buying a house from someone, and that person is going to charge you and then transfer the property to you, right? There will be transfer duty that is going to be charged by SARS on that transaction. So whenever there is an exchange of an asset from one person to the other, especially if it's an immovable property like a house, like a factory, right, SARS will then charge what is called transfer duty. Right, we also have what we call a UIF, right, unemployment, right, unemployment insurance fund, right, very popular, especially around the COVID lockdown. That's UIF. So whenever you are employed, there is a small percentage, 1% of gross, that is deducted from your salary, and it is supposed to be used to cushion the unemployed with a little bit of something so that everyone can survive. So everyone plays a part when it comes to funding the government, right? We also have what we call skills development levy, right? Again, this is charged on individuals that are employed, right? So the funds are ring-fenced and used to help improve the skill base for companies. So this is the money that is used to fund trainings by the government, to fund learnerships and similar endeavors. Right. Let's say ETC, these are the most popular taxes that are possible in South Africa. Right. So when it comes to tax legislation or tax terminology, right, we have got certain classifications that we have on taxes. Right, so we classify our taxes in different forms. So I'm going to look at the classification, right, of taxes. Right, let me just point something out. I've been doing a lot of these assignments for 2601. Right, this one you must be very clear about. You get a number of questions around this, that one in particular. So there is usually a question that is asked to say, which taxes among these form part of the income tax? So which taxes fall under income tax, or which tax is not part of the Income Tax Act? So you must know that when you talk about income tax, you include capital gains, you include turnover tax, you include dividend tax. Of course, that question will be multiple choice, so they will add something else. They will add value-added tax. They will add maybe customs duty. So this one, if you get it right now, you'll probably get a couple of marks in your assignments. There will definitely be questions around that. So just make sure they. Right, so we are looking at the classification of costs. Right, so when we classify costs, right, we are grouping certain types of taxes. I'm saying cost here, I'm thinking I'm in management accounting. Right, when you classify taxes, you are grouping taxes according to certain what characteristics and similarities. Right, so we have classification, right, based on the tax base. Right. When we say tax base, we are saying what is the tax charged on? Right. What is the tax levied or charged on? Right. What is the tax charged on or levied on? Right. So in this characterization, right, we have taxes that we call income taxes. Right. We already highlighted some of them. Right. These are based on income earned. These are based on income earned. Whenever you earn income, right, then you are going to be charged a tax. Right. Examples include tax on salaries, right, of individuals. Right. This is called simple income tax, right, of individuals. Right. We also have income tax, right, on corporates. Right. Those are examples of income taxes. They are charged on the income earned by a taxpayer. Right. Also under the taxes that are based on what on the tax base, we also have what we call consumption taxes. Right. We also have what we call consumption taxes. Right. These are based right on the sale of goods, commodities, right, and provision of services. So whenever there is an exchange, right, of commodities or services, right, where a consideration or a charge is levied, then you are going to get likely consumption taxes. Right, so these include such things as value-added tax. It's a consumption tax, right? Or what we call customs duty, right? Remember, you would have bought something from outside, so you are consuming an import, right? So whenever you do that, whenever you consume an import, you are going to be charged VAT, right? Then there is another category that we call wealth taxes, right? These are levied whenever there is a transfer of wealth from one individual to the other, right? So whenever there is a transfer of wealth, right, from one company to the other or individual to the other. Right, a type of taxes that fall under this category, right, we have donations. Right, whenever you make a donation, there is going to be a charge, which is currently sitting at around 20%. Right, estate duty, right, there is a transfer of wealth there from one individual or from one person to another. So that's an example of a wealth tax. Right, then we have other, right, other types of taxes. Now, these are based on individual transactions. So they don't fall into any of the three categories above, but they are based on what? Certain transactions. So they won't be based on anything, e.g., fuel levy, right? Dividend tax. These are specific taxes in their nature, right? Based on a particular transaction. So we are saying all our taxes that we have should be grouped according to any of these groupings that we have. So this first grouping is based on what the tax is based on. So we then classify our taxes in these following manners. Right. Any question? Right. In particular, here you must be very much aware, as I highlighted, on what falls under the income taxes. You get a lot of questions there. The reason why I'm saying so, in this module, we strictly concentrate on the income tax. We concentrate more on the income tax. We don't worry about the other taxes except for introduction like this. But when we continue now with our work here, we are going to be concentrating mostly on income tax. And you need to be clear on that. Right. Another calculation or another classification of tax, right, or base, it is right based on what? On method of calculation, not on what. Sorry, based on method of calculation. Right. So these, when we say classification of cost, we are saying in which ways do we describe taxation or do we group taxes? So one of the way to group tax is to talk about proportional tax. So we have what we call proportional tax. Remember, we are talking about the method of calculating the tax here. Right, we're talking about the method of calculating the tax. And we are saying one of the ways is proportional tax. Now, this is based on a fixed rate of taxation. This is based on a fixed rate of taxation. So the amount of tax that you pay is not always the same, right? It depends on the value of your tax base. It depends on the value of your tax base. If you've got a bigger amount, because the percentage is the same for everyone, you are going to pay more. Then the one who has got a small amount of money will pay less tax. So it is, in a way, a very fair amount of taxation. It's proportional to the tax base and the amount that the tax is going to be based on. So we call that proportional tax. Right. Then we have progressive tax. Again, this is important. This description is important on your multiple choice questions. Right? They ask a lot of questions around the information that I'm giving you here. Right. So when you talk about a progressive tax, we are saying the rate increases with the amount earned. Right. Rate increases as amount being taxed increases. Right. We all know this from employment. Right. Our tax brackets at work do differ. The higher the salary, the higher the percentage of tax that you are charged. The lower the salary, and the lower also the rate of taxation. So this is a tax that seeks to cushion the poor from the adverse effects of taxation, right? But tax significantly higher on those who earn a higher income. So we call these progressive taxes, right? So for these, we can talk about, for example, income tax of individuals. Right. The higher the amount that you earn, your tax bracket will be higher than the person below. Right. So I said in industrial, they meant individuals. So income tax of individuals. Right. You pay a tax based on what? On a progressive rate. Right. Any questions, good people? Right. Then we have what we call regressive. Right. Tax. Right. This is the opposite of progressive. So under this one, we are saying the rate decreases as income increases. Right, the rate decrease, right, as the amount being taxed increases. Right, some people see it as fair. Right, if you work very hard professionally or in business, you are likely to earn a higher amount that is going to be taxed. Right, so therefore, we are saying that because of the amount that you have earned, you are already earning, you are already paying a higher tax. So the government then incentivizes you to invest more and to grow your business because 2% of a very big amount is significant than 2% of a small amount. So if I've worked hard in life and I am earning a million per month, right? If the government taxes me 10% of that amount, I pay 100,000 in taxes. So I'm still paying a very high amount, right? If someone earns only, say, 200,000, right, in a year, and the government taxes that person 20%, this person is still paying less tax than I am paying. So by virtue of my stamina in business, by virtue of my enterprise, even if the tax rate is reduced slightly, I still pay more tax. And the government wants me to keep on investing and growing the business so that I can employ more people. I can pay more tax. So they will incentivize me by reducing the amount of tax that I pay because I'm already paying significantly. Even if the rate is reduced, I'll still pay a significant amount in taxation. So that's a progressive tax. We don't have this one in South Africa. Right? In South Africa does not have a regressive tax. All our taxes are either progressive or they are proportional. Right? Are we clear, good people? So these are different classifications of taxes. Right, let's go to the final one. Right, the final one is based on who pays, right, on who must pay the tax. Right. So again, this is important. It will be important in your multiple choice question. Right. Number one, or number bullet point number one, we have what we call direct taxes. Right. So we have what we call direct taxes. Right. When we talk about a direct tax, right, we are saying the person that earns the income. Right. Person who earns the income. Right. Has the burden of taxation. The person who earns the income has the burden, right, of administration. That is, the earner of the income, right, must submit VAT returns or must submit tax returns, right, must submit tax returns, right, and pay over to SARS. Right, an example of this is your income tax of individuals. Right, when you earn your income from employment or from your businesses, when the season of taxation comes through, you submit your own tax returns on the income that you have earned. You are responsible for submitting tax returns, income tax for companies as well. Estate duties. Right, etc. So these type of taxes, they fall under direct taxes. Right, then we have indirect taxes. Right, the person who pays the tax, right, does not have burden of admin. Right, an example of this would be value-added tax, dividend tax. Right, with value-added tax, the person that pays the VAT is the final consumer. So when you visit a supermarket and you buy bread and it has got VAT there, the money comes from you, but you are not interested in how that money reaches SARS. The supermarket is the one that collects the money on behalf of SARS and submits it over to SARS. So there is a clear distinction between the person who actually pays the tax, who is the customer in the shop, right? And the person who is then face SARS in making sure that they make submissions to SARS and they have the burden of administering that tax. So this is different from income tax. You earn the income yourself, you submit the tax and pay yourself. So we have what we call direct and indirect taxation. Right. Are we still there, good people? Any question on what we have on the board? Right. Are we clear?
Yes, we're still here.
Wonderful.
Yes, we're clear.
Right. So this theory is very important. It has to be on your fingertips. That's what they ask you in your assignment number one. And all the other multiple choice questions, they repeat the same questions. Right. Of course, there will be calculations. There will be other questions where they want you to calculate. But some of the work is just basically theory. Choose the correct among these options, those type of questions. So you need to make sure that you sit on your theory, you understand it, especially these things that I'm highlighting here. Very important, that one. Right, classification of cost. They will give you a list of taxes and say which one is not a tax on which one is not based on income tax, which one is not a consumption tax, and they will give you 4 items and one will be incorrect. So even these ones are very important. You need to be very, very sure of that. Right, let's look at the administration of taxes in South Africa. Right, let's look at the administration of taxes in South Africa. Right, when it comes to taxes in South Africa, right, SARS is the government department. Right, SARS is the department, right, responsible, right, for tax matters in South Africa. Right, so SARS, remember, represents the South African Revenue Services. Right, so that's South African, right, Revenue Services. Right, so we have the South African Revenue Services. Right, SARS is headed by a commissioner. Right, SARS is headed by a commissioner who is appointed to administer taxation in South Africa, responsible for collections, right, responsible for communications, responsible for the disbursements of tax funds, right, all things related to tax. He is like the CEO of the South African Revenue Services. Right, then we are saying a taxation, right, is governed, right, or directed, right, by, right, number one, by the acts or tax legislation, right, and also by what we call judicial decisions. Right, that's incorrect. Right, by the judicial decisions. Right, so there are two sources of tax law. There are two sources of tax law. We have legislation and we also have judicial decisions. I think I put the other way around. Right, it was correct the first time. Right, so we have decision. Right. So taxation is governed by legislation, tax legislation, and judicial decisions. Right. So when you talk about tax legislation here, right. So we are talking about the rules, regulations, right? The rules and regulations, right, contained in the various acts, right, enacted, right, to govern tax regimes. Right, these acts are enacted by the parliament, right, of South Africa, right, and hence are part of law. Right, remember the laws of the country are designed in the parliament. Right, so types of acts that we have. Right, we've got the Income Tax Act. Right, number 58 of 1962, if I'm not wrong. Right, let me check properly the date of the act. It's provided. I think if you go to a study guide, you'll find it. Right, I will check it in a textbook here and see if I can find it. Right, so there are different types of acts that we have, and these acts are actually addressing a different type of tax all the time. So a different classification of tax will be governed by its own act. Right, so I want to check that this one we should get right, the Income Tax Act, because this is our main act. In this module, we deal with the Income Tax Act only. Right, so I got it correct. So it's the Income Tax Act 58 of 1962. Right, then we also have the Value Added Tax. This is a fairly recent tax, Value Added Tax Act, right, of 89, 1991. So before 1991, there was no value added tax. Right, we were using what is called the Income Tax Act. Right, we also have Transfer Duty Act. Right, so you can see by the name what the tax is designed for, or what the act is designed for, which type of tax. So this one governs estate duty, right, of 1949. It means that the act was developed in 1949. It could have been changed or adjusted over time, but 1949, we're just noting to when the tax was first introduced in South Africa. Right, we also have customs, right, duty and excise duty act. Right, so this one was enacted in 1964. Right, let's just say ETC. What is important is that we are able to capture this one because that's the act that we use. All other acts are not relevant to the syllabus except maybe just to mention them. But otherwise, we concentrate mostly on the Income Tax Act. Right, so we are saying that the laws that govern the conduct of SARS, that also tells taxpayers what to do, how to do it, right? You will find them either in the acts, which form part of the legislation of the country, or you'll find them in judicial precedents. Right. Remember, tax is not a straitjacket. It's not always that the taxpayer and SARS will agree on interpretations of the Income Tax Act. Right. There are usually disputes between SARS and the taxpayers. These are numerous and many, and these usually end up in courts of law. Right. So that normally the disputes are around interpretation. SARS will be saying to the taxpayer, you are owing us because the act says this. And maybe the taxpayer is in dispute with what SARS is saying. Remember, the act must be interpreted by someone, right? It could be someone who is employed by SARS, who is employed to assess tax returns for payers, right? They will then be guided by the tax legislation, right? And then they'll interpret what the tax legislation is saying, and then they will probably charge taxation to an individual or to a company based on what the tax is saying. Right. However, it's their opinion of what the tax legislation is saying. Sometimes tax legislation can be complicated and tricky. And the taxpayer may have a different take on what the law is saying and may dispute what the assessment given by an employee of SARS. And disputes do arise. Right. When disputes arise, sometimes they end up in courts of law, right, where the court will then go through the dispute and issue a final, what do you call it when a court issues a final decision on a case, right? What do you call that? Right, when a court issues a ruling, So that therefore, next time that there is a dispute of a similar nature, or of the same nature, right, we can also now reference to a previous ruling by the court. So we'll use the Tax Act that is there, but we'll also look and note the rulings of the judges with regard to that particular matter. So that taxation therefore uses both the Act and the previous rulings on similar matters that are contained in judicial rulings. Right, are we clear, good people, on what we use to determine a tax law? Right, so let me just say, right, judicial decisions, right, and rulings. Right, then we'll just mention in the notes that, right, many tax disputes, right, end up at the courts. Right, and then rulings, right, on such cases, right, provide a rich and valid interpretation, right, and valid interpretation, right, of the Tax Act. Right, so previous rulings can then be used to settle disputes between SARS and a taxpayer. So in other words, you must remember that tax law is derived from legislation, which is the primary source, complemented also by judicial rulings as well. So that is important, right? However, I want you to take note that NP, the supreme law of a country, right? The supreme law of a country, right, is the Constitution. Right, so previous rulings, present legislation must be subordinate to the Constitution. So at the end of the day, we are saying if there is a very big dispute that cannot be settled by either interpreting the Act or judicial rulings, we have to look at whether the Constitution is being violated or adhered to, right? Because we are saying even though the Act is, these are decisions and rulings enacted by Parliament, right? However, they are still subject to the provisions of the Constitution of South Africa. That's why many tax rulings at times where someone alleges that their constitutional rights are being violated, right, end up in the Constitutional Court of the land, which is the highest ever possible court in South Africa. Right, so even though we have judicial rulings, we still have the acts, but we are saying ultimately everything must adhere to the Constitution. Even the Act and the judicial rulings are implemented in such a way that they are actually administering the Constitution of the Republic. Right. Are we clear, good people? Are we on the same page?
Yes, sir.
Right. Let's go to interpretation. Right. Interpretation, right, of the Act. Right. Remember, the Act is created, is a creature of the Parliament of South Africa. Then it is given to SARS to administer. Right. Usually, if you have seen the Act, certain things, certain pages, when you open and read it, can't make sense. It's difficult because of the language that is used, text language, and also something akin to legal language. So the Act must be interpreted, right? The one that interprets, that needs to interpret the text is SARS so that they can administer it, but also the taxpayer so that they can adhere to it and they can also dispute if their rights according to the Act are being trampled upon. Right. So you then have these two people, the administrator of taxation, which is SARS, and the taxpayer, right, who are looking at a piece of legislation and both are trying to interpret. At times, you find that there are disputes between these people. They don't come to an easy conclusion. Right? Someone says this act is saying this, and therefore you must pay. The other person says, no, but I think it means this. You are wrong there. So they then sometimes arise these kinds of disputes that must be settled between SARS and the taxpayer. Right. These are usually valid at times disputes because we have seen people take SARS to court and win, which means someone who is sitting there in the office at SARS may have interpreted incorrectly. Right. So tax legislation must be interpreted. Right. Then we are saying when it comes to the interpretation of taxation, we then, besides, remember we said we have got legislation. Right. Then we are saying, right, let me add here that legislation, right, in the form of acts, is the main source, right, of tax rules. Right. And we are saying this is complicated or complemented. This is complemented, as we have already said, by previous judicial rulings. Right. So remember those judicial rulings, it's people trying to interpret the act there. So at least you have learned judges who do that for you. So certain things that are sources of disputes will have already been discussed in courts. Right. Then we are saying these are the two pieces of, one is legislation, one is rulings. These are two items that most people rely on when they interpret tax rules and regulations. Right. However, we are saying that the commissioner sometimes issued, right, sometimes issues, right, general binding rules, right, and interpretation notes. Right, these are additions, or these are additional attempts by the commissioner, right, to provide more clarity, right, on complex tax issues. Right. So remember now we've got the act, which is written in a language that may be very difficult for the general person to interpret at times. The commissioner may have identified over time possible areas where disputes are numerous, and he would have tried to preempt that and reduce misinterpretations, right, by issuing general binding rules and the interpretation notes. Right. So we have general binding rules. Right. These are interpretations, right, of the act, right, provided by the commissioner. Right, as mandated by Parliament. Right. So there are certain areas where the commissioner is given powers to issue general binding rules outside the sitting of parliament to provide additional rulings. Now, these binding rules, right, form part of legislation, right, and hence the act. So these will be included in the act, but there will be an extra. So you get a page or some pages after the act where you get general binding rules. So that when you open the act, you go through a certain paragraph, they will give you a reference to say, for more clarity, refer to the back of the act and find the general binding rules. Right, then we have interpretation notes. Right, again, they love this in your theory questions. I have been doing a lot of theory over time, a lot of assignments, multiple choice assignments over this. So I know what they are asking you in those assignments. So you need to know and understand that general binding rules are form part and parcel of the Act. But the interpretation notes are not part of the Act. Right? These are additional notes provided by the commissioner, right, to provide more info on complex tax issues. Right? These do not form part of legislation. Right? These do not form part of legislation. Right? They are mere explanations. So it means that you can dispute these notes. You can decide not to look at them. Right? These can be set aside. It's just a guide. So if you don't agree with the commissioner, you can say, I don't agree with this, then let's put it aside. Let's look at other ways in which we can actually try and address this, but I don't want to look at the notes. But the general binding rules now form part and parcel of the Act. Right, so when they ask you multiple choice questions there, right, they will write statements there. But more importantly, they'll be trying to test you for your understanding of the fact that this does not form part of the Act. This is not binding on either the taxpayer or SARS. However, on this one, you need to remember that this is binding and eventually ends up as part of the Act. You get a couple of questions on multiple choice on this. So it's a red flag. You need to make sure you are very clear on that. Right, especially the distinction of which one is binding and which one is not, which one is included in the Act and which one is not going to be included in the Act. So that is very, very, very important. Make sure that you are clear. Right, are we on the same page with people? Are we understanding each other?
Yes.
Yes. Right, then we want to look at what we call dispute resolution. Right, dispute resolution. Right, remember we are saying that we have our main source of law, which is the Act, complemented by the judicial rulings. Right, then there are two interested parties, which is SARS and also the taxpayer. So these people are going to be deriving their arguments or their engagements based on the Act, but sometimes they don't agree. Now, how does the tax system work usually? So what happens most of the time is that a taxpayer, which may be an individual or a company, right, when he's supposed to pay a tax, he accesses some forms from SARS, then which we call tax returns, or otherwise he accesses the online platform, right, e-filing. So either use e-filing or you get the physical forms. E-filing, you get the forms on the system, right? Then you fill in the relevant forms, you fill in the relevant information, right? You submit to SARS for assessment. Usually when you make a submission, sometimes it goes with a payment as well. Then you make your submission. But now we are saying, remember now you are interpreting the act and making a submission over to SARS. Then you pay them. SARS will then take their time, check the documentation, check the information that you have given them, check also the payment that you have done. Right? Either they will agree with you fully and say you have interpreted correctly according to how we also interpret. Right? Then they will give you an assessment which agrees with you. Right? If you have made mistakes and they don't agree, then they will issue an assessment which is different from what you submitted, usually with a request for an extra payment. Right? I'm sure you have seen that after you pay tax, they want an extra amount pesos, and they say that you did not pay the correct amount. Right? If you accept their assessment and agree with it, and you see where you made a mistake, you simply pay the extra money and the case is closed. Right? However, there are situations where a taxpayer feels like that he is correct and SARS is wrong. They interpret it incorrectly. Now, there are remedies that are available to the taxpayer to pursue in order to address the situation if they have got a grievance with the tax liability that they've been given by SARS. So there is a dispute resolution process that a taxpayer can follow in order to deal with any dispute. Right, so there is a dispute resolution process that can be followed. Now, remember, for the dispute resolution process to begin, SARS must give the taxpayer an assessment, and the taxpayer must not be agreeing to SARS. So, what do you do when SARS gives you a return and you are not happy? Right, there are steps that you follow if you are not happy. Right, number one, if let's say if a taxpayer is a dispute, right, if a taxpayer is a dispute with an assessment provided by SARS, right, so what we can do, the taxpayer can then lodge what is called an appeal, right? The taxpayer will then lodge, right, is an appeal, an objection. Which one starts first? He lodges an objection, right? Lodge an objection, right? Lodge an objection, right? It's the objection first, then the appeal after. Lodge an objection, right? Right. To lodge an objection, the taxpayer must fill a notice of objection form. So there is a particular form that he must fill called the notice of objection form. Right. NOO form. Right. The form is called D8R1 form. Right. It's called an ADR1 form. Right. This form must be filled within 30 days of receipt of assessment. Right. Filled within 30 days, right, of receipt of assessment. If you don't fill it within 30 days, then your dispute falls away. You have to pay. Right. So these are working days. Right. Excluding public holidays. Right. And weekends. So that's how the 30 days are counted. Right. The ADR form, ADR1 form, right, must be in the prescribed format. So you can't just write a letter to say I'm disputing. You have to fill in a prescribed format of the ADR1 form. It must be dated. All right, let me do this. All right, the ADR1 form must be in prescribed format. Right, must be dated, must provide reasons. Right, for dispute, must include the value of dispute. If SARS is saying you are owing us 1 million, maybe you agree with certain provisions or certain submissions by SARS and you are disputing only 300,000 Rand. You need to mention the amount as well. Right, so it must be submitted to the correct address. Right, it must be signed, the right sign today. The form must be signed by the taxpayer. Right, so it must be signed by the taxpayer. So all of these things are important for an effective objection. Right, in your multiple choice questions, they'll ask you about the things that must be provided on the ADR1 forms. So you need to know these things. It must be dated, it must be signed, it must provide a reason, it must provide the value of the dispute. So maybe they will put something that I did not include today and then say which item should not be included in the ADR1 form. So they'll add something that is not part of the list today. Right. They also like to ask the number of days. You must be clear about the number of days here. There will be a lot of questions that will ask you about days there. So you need to be very, very clear on that. Right, so you load an objection on an ADR1 form to notify SARS that you are not in agreement because of APC. SARS, when they receive your notice of objection, they are going to check what you are saying. Right, maybe they will see that they made a mistake and then they will give you a revised assessment. But if they are still saying they are correct, they will then give you a response to say that they reject your objection. They stick to their figure. Right. When you then receive a rejection of an objection, your next step there, right? So if objection, right, is rejected by SARS, this time you must load a notice of appeal. Right. Next, you load a notice of appeal. Right. And notice of appeal form, NOP. Right, with a notice of appeal, you fill a form called a ADR2 form. Right, again, they will ask you which form you're supposed to fill in your multiple choice. So they will probably give you, when lodging a notice of appeal, you must fill an ADR2 form. That's option number one, or just say RT form true or false. Then you must choose the correct one option. So it's a must that you understand which form goes with which what appeal or with which notice. If it's an appeal, ADR2. If it's an objection, ADR1. Right, so this one must contain the same info. Right, same info is on ADR1 highlighted above. So you must have the address, the reason, right? It must be signed, it must be dated, it must be sent to the correct address. So that's a notice of appeal. Right, when you lodge a notice of appeal, right, you have got two options to produce to proceed. Remember, now you have disputed uh, the assessment by SARS. You want to take it further in the dispute resolution process. So there are two options that you can take to address this issue. Right, so in your appeal, right, you advise how you want to proceed. Right, you must advise how you want to proceed. Right, between two options. Right, number one, or number, yeah, the right one. Or let me just write, put a bullet. Alternative, right, alternative dispute resolution. So you can choose this process, or you can choose the text bot. So it is not a must to go to the text bot. You have an option to first go to the alternative dispute resolution process. But if you want to bypass that, you can jump it and go straight to the text bot. But you have the option of the alternative dispute resolution process. Now, this is a platform. This is a platform provided by SARS, right, for mutual engagement. Right, to find a solution. Right, between SARS and the taxpayer. So this is a process that SARS can use, where you can meet the officials at SARS and you can sit down and look at the merits of whatever it is that you are discussing. You look at it together, interpret that, and then make a decision. Right. Remember, this is a voluntary exercise or a voluntary platform. Right. A taxpayer, right, has the opportunity to elect to use or reject this platform. So it's not enforced. It's a platform that is available where you can go and sit with someone and you can discuss the case and see if you can come to an agreement with SARS. Right. So here, a senior official is appointed by SARS. Right. The taxpayer can attend in person. Right. The taxpayer can attend in person or send a representative. Right. So because this is just a platform where you can go and discuss with SARS, right, you can still continue having a dispute after. So it is possible that this process does not solve the problem. Right. If it does not solve the problem, then you proceed now to the text port. Now remember, you can go straight to the text port. Right. You can proceed straight to the text port. So from the lodging of an appeal, the next step is either the alternative dispute resolution process or what is called the text port. Right, the text port hears disputes of figures ranging up to at least a minimum of 500,000. So let's say amounts of up to 500,000, right, can be heard in the text port. If the figure exceeds this amount, it is beyond the mandate of the text port. It will go to the next court. It will not go to the text port. Now, the text port here, we need a judge here. Right? Who sits on the text port? Right? There is no judge in the text port. So it must consist of an advocate or attorney. Right? Who chairs the port? So an advocate or attorney will be appointed to chair the port. Right? Then the taxpayer can come with his representative, and SARS can come with their representative. Now, Aniti, SARS and the taxpayer are not agreeing. We bring a third person now, a neutral person. So we bring someone who is an official of the courts. We bring an advocate or an attorney to sit in there. These guys will present, and the attorney will then make a call on the decision, will make a ruling. Right. However, we are saying the rulings are not binding. Right, which means they provide room for disputing. They provide room for disputing. So the text port is not the court of law in a way. Right, the text port is an attempt now to say that we are not agreeing between SARS and the taxpayer, and let's bring in someone neutral now who can arbitrate. But the rules that are then made is just an advice by the attorney to say, I think we should settle it like this. But if you still feel aggrieved as a taxpayer, you can take the matter up with the tax court. So if you are still aggrieved, you then take the matter with the tax court. Right. So if not settled, right, in the port, proceed right to the tax court. Right. So now we go to the court of law. Remember, we're still here trying to solve the matter amicable, but we're in disagreement. Now we use the courts. Right. The tax court again does not issue binding rulings. Right. It's a persuasive court. Right, we bring in the learned judges here who will hear the case and give their input. But their input is not rulings. So therefore, those are not binding on SARS and the taxpayer. If anyone has got a dispute, they can go ahead to the next court. Right. What is important here is that it consists of a minimum of a judge. So we're bringing in the big guys, but still we're not in a court of laws per se. It's a court, it's a tax court. It's a creature created by SARS, but it's not part of the courts of law of the country. So here it simply means that SARS now brings in a judge to come and sit in and hear the case and make his judgment. But the judgment is not binding. If the parties agree to it, then it's fine. It's all the better. But if they don't agree, then they take it now to the High Court. Right. If dispute persists, right, then we use High Court. Right. Now we are in the main courts of the country. The rulings issued here are binding. It means when the High Court has ruled, you cannot go back to the tax court. Whatever the High Court rules, it then overrides everything that was said in the tax court or in the tax court. We are now at law. So here we are saying up to a maximum of 3 judges. Right, up to a maximum of 3 judges are appointed to hear the case. Right, and the rules and the rulings, right, bind all the lower courts. So whatever has been ruled here, you cannot go back now to a lower court. You cannot reference back to what was said in the lower court. The High Court is superior to these other courts that would have been used. Right, then we are saying the rulings of the High Court can only be disputed in the Supreme Court. Right, if dispute persists, right, then we use the Supreme Court. Right, here the full bench sits. Right, rulings bind all the lower courts. So whatever was said in the lower courts, it is thrown out because a superior court is now sitting. If previously SARS won in the High Court and you take the matter to the Supreme Court and the taxpayer wins, it is settled. The High Court decision is rescinded. Right. Normally, most tax disputes they end in the Supreme Court, which is usually the highest court of the land for most disputes. Right. However, we still have the Constitutional Court. Right. If dispute persists, and it's of a constitutional nature. Right, where the taxpayer is saying, my rights constitutionally have been stamped upon, then they can use the Constitutional Court. But the Constitutional Court is a special court. It can only hear cases of a constitutional nature. So therefore, if the dispute is not of a constitutional nature, it will end in the Supreme Court. And what must you guys know? You must know the order of the dispute resolution process. That's what you get in your multiple choice question. So you must know that you start by lodging an objection, which form, next notice of appeal, dispute resolution or the tax court, and then tax court, high court, Supreme Court, and the Constitutional Court. You get questions that test you on the understanding of this order. There will be plenty of questions like that. And you must know also that which courts bind the other. Remember, the tax court cannot bind anything. The tax court cannot bind anything, but the high court can bind everyone who is lower than the high court. And the high court can only be binded by the Supreme Court, so that they will ask you again. So this is what your multiple choice will be asking you, in addition to a couple of calculations that I will look at later as we go through the syllabus. So for today, let's end it here. Take your time, go through the session, make sure you master everything. It's important for your test number 1. Are we clear?
Yes, sir.
Wonderful. So ngizoyirekhoda isession yami leyi, and then I will make it available. Ngizolithumela link so that you can at least go through it there on your own as well. Thank you. Sharp, sharp.
Siyabonga.